My name is America, and I am a project manager at Yeti, and today we're going to be talking about retrospectives. So you've all probably at least been in a retrospective before. They're meetings, they should be occurring on a regular basis where the team as a whole has an opportunity to reflect on your past work, the work that you've done together, figure out what's been working for the team, what hasn't been working for the team, and ideally choose things that the team would like to improve. So a lot of the time, retrospective and postmortem are used interchangeably. And for a long time, I thought that they were just two words for the same thing. They're not at all, actually. A postmortem is something that is a much longer feedback loop. So you would do a postmortem maybe every 6 months to even once a year, or just after the end of a project. They are usually much longer meetings. And you're looking at just overall how a chunk of time has gone and potentially looking at action items you can use moving forward towards a new project or a new phase, whereas a retro is a much shorter feedback loop. So retro should be happening at the end of every sprint. If you're sprinting on a weekly basis, probably every other week, which is usually around when we run them at Yeti. And the idea here is that you can make micro adjustments to how your team is working. So just like how we iterate on products, we can iterate on how we're all working together to make sure that our performance over time is increasing. So how you run a retrospective, a lot of the time you will start with something called the prime directive. At Yeti, we don't need to go over this every single time because we're such a small team. But the idea is to start the meeting with kind of just creating a space where everyone can be involved. It's not a time, it creates the sense that it's not a time for blaming anybody. It's not a time for pointing fingers. It's simply a time for working together to try and focus on events that have happened and how we could improve the outcome of those events if they happen in the future. So the first thing that you want to do in a retrospective is to generate ideas. It can be done in a lot of different ways. There's kind of the classic good, better, best model. Recently, we've been using liked, lacked, learned. And then there's also a lot of other kind of fun activities like making a hot air balloon, and you can look at kind of what's holding the balloon down, what's pushing the balloon up, and then if there's like any forces that could knock the balloon off of its trajectory. But at the end of the day, it's all the same principle, and it's ideally to celebrate the successes that the team has had, and then also focus on what could actually be improved. The next step is a discussion section. So once you've generated all of your ideas, however you generate them, then you want to actually choose some of them to talk to. Here, there's two separate camps that people usually fall into. There's one big camp that says, this is just a discussion time. You shouldn't take notes on this. You shouldn't get action items out of this. I've never personally understood that because I feel like if we have a big, good discussion and we don't actually get anything out of it, then why do we pull everyone into a meeting? So I fall into camp 2 here, where I feel like you should be having a good discussion, but that discussion should be focused on generating action items that can be reported, assigned to actually help promote that change. So overall, like, what is the point of these meetings? Improvement, like I've talked about a lot. Also bringing team issues to light. So it's a good opportunity to talk about in a constructive way if people haven't been working together very well. If there is team friction, it's kind of the perfect opportunity to bring that up. And overall talking about the group dynamics, that can be the group dynamics within your team, or we do a lot of client work. So the group dynamics working with our clients and how we can improve that. And so the biggest question that has always sort of been lingering, I think, in both Yeti retros and retros in general is that you get all of this really great information, but what do you actually do with it? You can give people action items, they can action on them, but how do you find a time to review if those action items have actually been followed through on and if they are actually working? So that's something I think everyone in the Agile community is still figuring out. A lot of the time also people don't like retros. They're seen as kind of a big waste of people's time. because it is a time commitment. Usually they take at least an hour, and so that's an hour every other week of your team's time, and I think a lot of time people feel like they could be doing development work or design work or having other meetings during that time. But kind of like we've discussed, retros are really important, and you won't see team change unless you're actually reviewing your behavior. And retros can make people feel very uncomfortable because you're talking about team dynamics. You could potentially hear from a team member that you are doing something that is bothering them or isn't working for the team. And also there can be a feeling when teams are doing really well and maybe have been having retrospectives really regularly that they don't need them anymore. But that is also another dangerous road to go down, because no matter what, you're never too good to be reviewing your own work and to be learning from it. And so even if your retro is really quick and it's just taking 30 minutes, taking that time as a team together is really important to just resync. So I've been pulling our retro data for about a year now. I've been recording every post-it that we make, every discussion point that we have, and I pulled this data into a big spreadsheet. Summer helped me organize it into kind of the top 5 things that we saw were going well and the top 5 things that we could be improved on. This data is a little bit stale because it's coming from like a year and a half ago, up until the end of this current year. But so the top 5 things that have been going well for us, we're having really good cooperation between development and design. That's something that I know has changed over the course of time because it has been a big friction point in the past. We're also doing a lot better on our client communication. Having someone in a project management role has been cited as something that's been very helpful. Doing regular design crits when we are doing design work has been really great. And overall, we're having really, really great teamwork, which is awesome to see. Some things that we could be improving on, a lot of the time I saw we were citing that we don't have the dev and design start time exactly down pat, which I think is still a pain point for us. Syncing tools like InVision, making sure that they're always up to date with like the latest and greatest of the designs is still a pain point. Meeting expectations, making sure all meetings have agendas, people, like the right people are invited to them, the right things are going on is still something that's a pain point. This idea with branding in an SOW, how that gets factored in, if Yeti is the right person to be doing it. That's been happening since like at least 2017 is something that's come up a few times. And then I think this is something that we're improving on now, especially with our Freuder project, providing higher level team leadership and strategy. So one thing that we've started to implement is this lessons learned document. It's a spreadsheet. You can access it in the team drive under company, under project management. Anyone is welcome to look at it, add things to it. Basically, after every retro, if there's a big item that we would do differently, I'm adding it there. I'm citing the project that it is coming from and what we would do differently, so that ideally in the future when we start a new project, we can take a look at that to just remind ourselves. I'm not sure exactly the best way to really utilize this document, so if anybody has suggestions, I'm totally open to hearing them, but I think we've taken the first step, which is the hardest, which is just recording all of our data. So yeah, that is retrospectives. Does anybody have any questions? We can dive more into the actual like retro points that we brought up, specific to Yeti, but yeah, any questions? Yeah, Kevin.
How much more effective do you think the hour-long retros are than the shorter one, like a half an hour?
I think a half an hour is just not going to be effective at all, because if you take into account everyone's going to be a few minutes late to the meeting, so say you're starting now 5 minutes late, post-it generation takes everyone between 6 to 10 minutes. Then actually putting up the post-its, talking through them is another roughly 10. So then you are leaving about 30 minutes for discussion. I think on some projects that have been retroing now for like months, like Hodl It is a good example of a project where everyone kind of like gets in the room, knows what they're doing, and gets everything done. Those take about 45 minutes. But I'd say you don't want to schedule anything less than an hour. Yeah.
Do you have any feelings or opinions on how to prompt people that might be a little less verbal or, you know, sharing in retros? Maybe kind of ways that you can kind of facilitate getting the actual information out of them that they're kind of holding on to?
Yeah, so I think a big part of that is the post-it generation, because everyone does that in a silo by themselves. And then something that I've been trying to do more is to have, rather than like dot voting on post-its, just having calling on each person to pick a topic that they want to talk about. I'm hoping is helping to get people who maybe don't feel like they are as opinionated or would hold back normally to at least choose a topic that interests them the most. Whether or not that's actually the most important topic for the group to be talking about is sort of doesn't matter at that point, because usually there's only a couple of them that are really, really important. And so I think everyone having a voice is almost more important. But in terms of like during the discussion, I'm not sure, because it's a little hard because you don't want to also like push too hard on someone. So if anybody has suggestions on that, definitely open to hearing them.
How would you say, because one thing that we're looking at is like trying to take the retrospectives and apply them. So we also have like the concept of working agreements. So I was working with like Twitter on a working agreement. How would you say is best to kind of like that, like essentially blend the working agreements with retrospectives and
Yeah, so what I've heard with working agreements is that usually they're brought sort of up during like the first part of the retrospective. So the first thing you would do is actually review the working agreement and kind of do maybe thumb voting on if we feel like we're following it, if we're not following it, like where we're not following it, and that would even potentially become a retro item to discuss. And then especially if we have a working agreement with a larger client, I feel like during those vision alignment meetings that we have with executives, bringing the working agreement up then, because they're not seeing it as often, it's kind of easily forgotten, is always a good plan, especially if we have feelings on areas that maybe aren't working as well for us, to kind of like know what those are going in.
And then what would you say, because like we do retros internally, we've done some retros with clients. What would you say is the level of involvement that would be ideal based on like, like should we get our executive stakeholders involved in retrospectives? Should we, because like it's like, I guess who should be involved in retrospectives ideally? Or like what do you think?
It's really tricky because a big part of what we do is very consultative, and so we don't really necessarily want to just get really down on our clients in a meeting like that. So I kind of feel like there sort of almost needs to be two meetings. In a situation like Further, where we're actually really ingrained with their internal team, I think it would be totally acceptable to have like Rob and Matt and Andy come to our retrospectives on a regular basis. And then to treat the vision alignment meetings more as like a time when we would bring in more key stakeholders.
Yeah.
Just because you want to make sure that it's always a safe space for the team on the ground to be able to express frustration or like talk through things that wouldn't be as appropriate to bring up like with a key stakeholder in the room. But it is also important to be able to surface to key stakeholders when things aren't working and what they could be doing better and kind of letting them be part of the process. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know, I'm trying to figure this out right now.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. Especially when the key stakeholders are not members of like our company. They're kind of an outside agency. Yeah.
Thomas, similar to that, do you think it's ever effective to run multiple retros with like team competition? So I feel like a good example is like Blood Force, where we have like Shira and Harry. They also have like an internal team as well. So
yeah, totally. I think it definitely can be. I think it can be effective to run retrospectives with different teams and also with different team makeups, both within the sprint time and also outside of the sprint time. So I feel like with Hello Divorce, it could have been good to be running retros with Shira and Cowrie during the design time, and then also to have more of a postmortem, which I think we're going to be doing for looking at the whole design process to see like how that went. So I feel like that could be good in the future. And then always like if an internal, so if we were working with a team kind of like we are with Further, if there was ever a situation where our internal team just felt like we wanted to retro, I think that's totally appropriate to ask for. And that not everyone always has to be included in every single meeting. as long as like those meetings are intentional and like the time is used well, I don't think it's ever a waste of time. Anything else? Anybody have any ideas of like what to do with all this retro data that I'm like gathering?
I love those. Like a lot of them.
We went all of it, put it all up on all the walls.
All of them. That would like cover every single inch of our house.
Maybe we can make those things we can improve on professionals and issues.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's really good for, I mean, like blog posts and, you know, the like little marketing videos that we've been like making this summer. It's like top 5 mistakes that like we've seen in projects, you know, like lessons learned when working with whatever, you know. I think there's all kinds of like, really good data.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of it, so we can definitely look through it.
Yeah, I mean, even just to, yeah, like I don't know. I think there is a lot we can do with it.
Cool.
Maybe before we start the project with clients, like hand them over like here's a sheet of all the things that go wrong. You know, whatever.
Everything that could possibly go wrong. Cool. Well, yeah, that is all I have. Thanks, guys.